our neighbor across the corner from VA. What's going on, Chelsea?
Hey, thanks for having me on again. Nice to
Yes,
see you.
THC Justice. She is our cannabis warrior, and she's pushing for all things cannabis equity. The people, the people's power in the plant, right? And then I also have a Marylander, a fellow Prince Georgian, from gorgeous Prince George's. Thanks for joining us, Kev. We have Kev from Uplift National.
What's up, y'all?
Yes. Well, glad to have you back, Kev. I know last time I had you here, we were discussing, what was to come of Maryland, right? I don't think they voted on it yet, at least as far as the general election, but I know that it was coming. And so Marylanders overwhelmingly voted to support cannabis legalization. I think it was around 73% of Marylanders who voted in favor of it. So that's pretty astounding.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely 73% in Prince George's County. It was 81% in Baltimore, and it was 65% on the whole state. So, and I think looking at the record of other states who have voted, I think we ranked even somewhere either second or third outside of DC, which was the highest for passing percentage. So, we definitely overwhelmingly passed it, and even surpassed my expectations for the passage as well.
Yes, and just for my education and other people's out there, Chelsea, Virginia, of course, is our neighbor. I like to think of you guys as the progressive neighbors, at least before Youngkin, right? But uh, yeah, that's a little joke, right? But the one thing I will say is, how did you guys legalize? Did you guys pass through ballot referendum similar to Maryland? Did you guys do it through the legislature? Um, do you have
Yeah,
medical? What does that look like over there?
it's a good question. And you are very right. This Commonwealth is extremely different after the November 2021 election. And right now, our current state of cannabis is that we are a legal medical state. In 2021, we passed legalization of possession. So you can have up to 1 ounce in your possession, and you can grow up to 4 plants in each household, not per person. And we also took some steps to seal records for marijuana misdemeanor possessions and things of that nature. We have not released nor resentenced anybody inside, but right now you can consume medical, you can buy medical, and then you can possess adults. Adults can possess and adults can actually consume in their private being, but you cannot buy anything without a medical card in Virginia yet. And
Okay.
you also asked me, Councilman, about the way that we voted. And I think it's important for folks to know too that Virginia is not a referendum state. So we had to actually do that through the legislature. And so folks watching that are in other states, please take advantage of being referendum states and getting people's votes. We actually found it to be a disadvantage in Virginia.
Okay. Understood. Understood. And so, I know you've been closely involved, paying attention to what's happening, not only in Virginia, but Maryland and DC, right? Like, I think that, DC is doing some interesting things, right? And revamping their policy, how they're going to regulate cannabis. So what essentially is working in DC that you would like to see in Maryland? Maybe not necessarily in place, but some of the things that are being proposed now. Because I really do appreciate that they're including the legacy market, in the decision-making process, right? So, I'd be interested to hear that from either of you, not just the services.
I can just jump in really quickly, but I'd love to hear Kevin's answer on this. I do think that I know people have been a bit impatient with DC, but I think that the time that they put into this has been necessary to get folks involved on a certain level. I think DC understands a lot about the criminalization, but doesn't understand necessarily what that has to look like on a business sense. I don't love everything about what DC is doing, obviously, but I think that they are really starting a conversation about folks in the legacy space and what that could really look like for a transition. Yeah, so I would say that I really appreciate their criminal justice approaches that they're trying, and then just the thought of legacy.
Right. And I know that the city council chair just produced or sponsored a bill even within the last week, I believe, that creates a regulatory framework just in case the federal government decides to change its mind. Um, so just like Chelsea said, I'm liking how they're including the community because they're the first ones here. We've been doing this, so I'm glad to see that they're doing that, and I'm hoping that we as a collective, as Black advocates, can ensure that our voice is heard at the table here in Maryland as well. So I think we're just at the very tip of the iceberg with both markets. So I'm really interested to see even how it ends up in terms of just local or regional regulations that could possibly even be could lead us towards interstate commerce.
Yeah,
Wow.
and Councilman, you opened us up by saying DMV, right? Like that we're really representing kind of that area, and so having these conversations about regional and interstate commerce is important to areas specifically like the DMV area because people work one place, they live another place, they go out for social things in different states, and those lines are so close, and we need to make sure that folks aren't going to get caught up in enforcement in a negative way. Particularly folks that look like us as we're trying to open up the markets across these three places.
And I think that also brings up a very interesting point about how are people in Virginia getting their cannabis if they I mean they can grow it, but who's really growing their cannabis at home? Not very many folks, and if they do, they still want to have something else to supplement what they're growing at home. So where are folks getting their cannabis from? And that's just a conversation that I think could be had to um, make things even more legal and just close the gaps where we have them with some of these gray markets.
Exactly.
Those are all great points, Kev. I'm taking frivolous notes over here. The question I have for you, right? We're now segueing to Maryland. Maryland, a lot of eyes are on Maryland. We have SB 516 and HB 556. So those are the big bills. Those are the cannabis reform bills this year, and I would say since we've been digging into it, give us an overview of some of the things that this bill, as it's written, as it's intended, looks to accomplish, and then we'll go, of course, some of the things we want to work on, touch on. But yeah,
absolutely. So first and foremost, it renames the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission to the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Cannabis Commission, which is a whole conversation in itself. It establishes the regulatory and licensing framework, imposes a sales and use tax, so just a tax at the actual point of sale versus a tax on the actual businesses. It establishes an Office of Social Equity, an advisory board on medical and adult use cannabis, as well as a social equity partnership fund. It alters some of the provisions regarding the Community Investment and Repair Fund. It establishes a Cannabis Regulation and Enforcement Division within the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Cannabis Commission. It requires that division to establish and maintain a state cannabis testing lab, which is something that the commission has been pushing for a while. And one thing that's kind of interesting about this bill, it essentially eradicates the medical market, not in a sense that patients won't still be able to be patients, but the way that these businesses are going to operate is that everything is within one, and then the only determining factor of whether that product is medical or adult use is at the point of sale when you're actually purchasing from the dispensary, and whether or not that tax is actually involved. It also prohibits certain actions by individuals and regulating actions that local jurisdictions can take, like opting out. It establishes a medical Medical Cannabis Compassionate Use Fund. It allows folks to do some cannabis research. It contains some prohibitions on cannabis advertising. And then it also offers different training programs, legal protections, a capital access program within the Department of Commerce. It regulates banking for cannabis businesses here at state financial institutions. And it actually exempts the commission from state procurement requirements, which could be an issue depending on the actual minority business enterprise goals that are set for subcontracting or contracting. And it requires licensees to apply with the state's MBE program through the Maryland Department of Transportation, and just has general provisions related to medical and adult use cannabis. So this is a huge bill. There are a lot of other bills that have been filed already, and we're going to have to see how we can get these things to work together for the benefit of the community, but also, just making sure that it's not necessarily respecting, I would say, the investment that the industry have made in our state already. I think that's an important part that legislators want to hear about. So, again, we're here to work together and create a realistic and implementable solution that really speaks to the intent of what this legislation seeks to achieve.
Yes. And I guess my first question, thanks for that brief overview. My first question for you, Chelsea, what are some of the things that some of the main concerns? I know Kevin's talked about a lot of what it's going to accomplish. I know that one of my biggest concerns was the enforcement, trying to quote unquote break up all illicit cannabis, activity thereafter, which will be really targeted a new war on drugs, but, also the changing to the ABC, right? Lumping it with alcohol and tobacco.
Yeah. You bring up some of the concerns that I do too, and that we have. So our main focus is normally on the criminal provisions, and what's happening in Maryland is that there will probably be another bill that touches on that. And if there isn't, then that's also a problem that we need to look at. And
there will. But we talked about earlier that we were disappointed that it
was
like,
not.
There's different legislations essentially. So
right, exactly, and that's part of the logistics and process that I don't always agree with, because when they are separate that way, then they become separate thoughts, and we need to be thinking about people holistically, how they fit into the upcoming market. And that means for many people, especially those that look like us, we have to also think about how the criminal justice system has impacted us. But so I would just lead off with that part. And with that in mind, I would say that our biggest concern outright is who has the most decision-making power for legal cannabis. And like you mentioned, it would be basically the top cop in Maryland, an armed police officer, and they are essentially merging the ABC tobacco and cannabis. So that's such a big issue for us in Virginia, because Virginia actually commissioned a study for the legislature to look at, if we legalized marijuana, this is back in 2020, what would it look like for us to do that as equity and to center equity? And in that report, it actually stated that for Virginia to produce the most equity beneficiaries and with the most equitable culture, like they even talked about culture in the department, that would require a separate cannabis authority rather than putting cannabis under ABC. It has it in writing. We're right neighbors. And the Virginia legislature actually had this study done. So it's language and research that they trust. And that is why in Virginia in 2021, when we were looking at our bill, we initially had it with ABC. That study was proposed. That study came back out. The legislators reviewed the language and they changed the language. And that's why Virginia is standing up their own cannabis control authority. because of that information. And so the idea of having a cop, literally the enforcers of the war on drugs, literally those that were the decision makers on the disparities that we have been feeling the last 50 years of prohibition, they're giving the power right back to them and saying, well, you didn't get an equity commission though. And that type of ad hoc versus literally weaving in equity throughout the entire process is really what we argued in Virginia. Don't just give us a commission. We need to weave it in every step of the way. And that's why just outright, you know, if someone would have asked me, I'm not a Marylander, but I'm really here to support you all. But outright, we would say we would have to oppose the bill from that alone. There's no way for a meaningful intent if we're giving the control right back to the enforcers of the war on drugs. And then, you know, there are other parts that really matter to folks about the reinvestment to communities and what that looks like. And so I think, too, the other part for us is that we want to be really prescriptive about how the revenue reaches community members in a meaningful way. So I would say let's look at the decision makers at the top. Let's look at some of these criminal justice pieces of resentencing and expungements. And let's also look at the revenue and how that is reaching directly communities that have been impacted, and specifically individuals, not necessarily the overseers of the locality that has allowed the disproportionate enforcement to happen. But how do we actually reach the people with these revenues?
Agreed. I mean, I think you brought up, and I'm coming to you, Kevin, I think you brought up a lot of great things. If you heard me on the Yes on 4 trail, I was pushing no legalization without decarceration and, full decriminalization, meaning that, no one should be criminalized for a now legal substance, and the past harms, they should be somewhat rectified, right? Or, trying to wrong those harms. One of the things that you brought up that I thought was very interesting, I think both of you guys, was, a commission. So not only, a social office of social equity, but a commission, and, the commissions that are making these decisions, what is the perceived, or not just what is the perceived, what is the proposed makeup? Because, I have a lot of problems, for one, with the MMCC not having, any medical patients on the board, or really, everyday, cannabis consumers, right? So it's a lot of business, regulatory people, corporate folks who don't necessarily consume. So do you know what the proposed makeup of the commission is? And then what are some recommendations? Because one of the things that I thought was, looking at the bill last year, there weren't enough positions for regular people like me and yourself, advocates. You had to be a super technical, a psychologist, a medical doctor, a lawyer. It was just these super technical positions. And
to be on the commission, you're saying?
Yeah, I think it was the commission. I believe it was the commission, but as far as you're looking at the proposed commission, who they say should be on there, the 1, the 2, 3s, how does that look, and what recommendations do you look for on that commission to actually build more equity and a better understanding of cannabis?
Right. So the commission in adding cannabis to alcohol and tobacco. So the commission is currently made up of 5 members, which is 1 law enforcement, 1 public health, 1 in alcoholic beverage industry, and then 2 shall be members of the public with substantial experience in finance and economics. And then they added another 2 seats to include 2 people knowledgeable in the cannabis industry. And that really doesn't, it helps, but even looking at this too, if this is the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Cannabis Commission, why is there no representative tobacco on here?
That's a good question, but it's not a question I love anyway. But
it's a bad question. It's not a question we want to talk about, but it is a question though. So it's going to be interesting to see, who they're able to appoint to these seats, these 2 seats in particular, and also just making sure that the rest of the board is equity focused, especially if you do keep these together. But again, of course, we want to see that it is its own standalone commission, where it has its own makeup of folks who are about cannabis, who are about equity, who are about business, um,
And
to make sure that it is as fair and equitable as possible.
one of the things I was going to say, Kev, was I think that not included here is somebody with a real knowledge of hemp, right? Because hemp and hemp production is different than the THC flower that we all love, and of course a lot of times we talk about hemp kind of as like an afterthought, right?
Mhm.
Like as far as the selling of the flower, but hemp I definitely believe will be the future as far as sustainability. It's going to become cheaper as more people use it.
And that's the perfect reason why it should be a cannabis and hemp commission,
Hey, we might got something right there. Cannabis and Hemp Commission. That's a recommendation right there.
Well, remember, hemp is cannabis. So that's
Right.
in Virginia why we call it the Cannabis Commission, because it also oversees hemp and allows that space for hemp operators. And so what we're saying here is like, we're actually able to clear a lot of extra space in the room and invite more people in when we're giving us a dedicated space to cannabis experts.
Right. And I know that the medical commission was tasked with doing some studies surrounding hemp, but they don't officially oversee that. It's the Department of Agriculture that oversees everything with hemp right now. So I think just even if you call it the Cannabis Commission, understanding that it has the cannabis sativa versus the what's the other one, y'all? The CBD one.
Delta 8 stuff.
No. Cannabis. Goodness gracious, I'm missing it. But
sativas and
it's another one. But anyways, so it's just gonna be. I think it'll be ideal for us to include those two things together and keep alcohol and tobacco something completely separate.
Sure.
Just because, specifically, and like Chelsea said, due to the fact that alcohol and tobacco is overseen by law enforcement. And that's just something I believe too is completely unacceptable.
Yeah, and just to cover many topics, I got some questions from people that had particular questions for you guys as cannabis experts, and community oriented cannabis experts, right? I would say the first question is, how do we get more Black folks in cultivation? And I think prefacing that question is like, we do need more Black people in cultivation, but there's a lot of spaces in which people of color can exist, and not just be a dispensary owner or a cultivator. So just being innovative. But I kind of throw that out to both of you guys.
Yeah. Well, one, I like the question because it gets me really legacy and ancestry minded, right? Of how particularly, folks from the diaspora have their hands in the ground, how we've always been growers and able to bring something from seed to life and really feed each other and provide things that are our wellness, right? So I think just that question alone gives me those types of vibes. So I appreciate it. And also want to lift what you said, that there's so much space in this industry for us to get everywhere. Right. But just to lift the cultivation a little bit, I think that we have to really identify who has been growing already, whether that's cannabis, whether that's food. In Virginia, in this very gray area, what we have seen is folks that already have land and space to grow. They've been the most accessible, as well as been able to bring other people along. So this is really collaborations and coalitions coming in together. And I really encourage people to try to stay in your lane, right? If you've never grown anything before, maybe being a cultivator isn't where you start in cannabis. Do something that you're already doing. And that's also how we don't like Trump on people. I hate to use that word, sorry, but that's how we also just make sure that we're allowing other people to come in their lane, right? And bring in their expertise to these pieces. So that's how my advice of how we can get more people involved is to find the folks that are already growing and work with them.
Yeah, and I would say that the legislation has the intent of, getting micro type businesses in there, which traditionally would be great for social equity applicants. But the thing is, the way that it's designed is still in a commercial environment that has a certain level of capital overhead that most folks don't have, you know. And I was actually on the Maryland Normal call the other day, and what they were talking about was the concept of the cottage industry, where you're essentially allowed to
That
grow
was a
your
question.
cannabis and then get it tested and go through the regular steps and have an opportunity to put your product on the shelf if it meets the standards and the dispensary is willing to buy it,
Sure, sure. We talked about cottage businesses. I love that because I know some good people who would benefit from this, and even like little farmers markets, community markets, things like that. People make a good living going to those different markets and stuff like that, getting fresh product, and the thought is a lot of times it's a lot more personal, right? It's a lot more personal getting your items from the farmers market as opposed to going to Walmart. And that's what we will see in the rec space. So I got a few questions, right? And I'm just gonna throw them out there. As far as how the bill is related, are they mandating separate spaces similar to like Colorado and some other places where the rec has to be in a separate dwelling, separate building, and then also the kind of follow up question is: do you foresee the prohibition for medical patients and legal gun ownership changing, especially given that new court case that I saw this week? So it's kind of the two-part question.
So I'll go on the second part first. There was a bill that was filed by Delegate Grammer that he's filed literally every year since I've been watching this thing.
I remember, yes.
But he filed it this year and it got shot down already. So it didn't receive a hearing or anything. So I'm going to go and say no on that one.
Okay.
The first part of the question was about what again?
The first part of the question was separating the spaces, commercial, recreational, medical.
So as I mentioned earlier, this essentially does away with the medical market. So it's all going to be in one space. If you're a grower, you're not going to have to use different metric tags for medical and adult use. For the in-dispensary experience, there won't be any difference aside from the fact that the medical patients still would have access to go and talk with the clinical director, and they won't get charged any sales tax. So that is the only difference. And I don't even know another state that has really gone this hard on trying to merge the two markets together. So I'm actually good with it because what it also does is going to correct the lack of diversity in operation at the medical level.
Sure. Well, one of the things I was just going to input, Kevin, was thinking about how that space works, right? One, it's even if the dispensary has a clinical director, because I know that in Maryland, there's only a few dispensaries that are fortunate enough to have clinical directors on staff to provide that extra level of education, cannabis education. But I do appreciate the aspect of kind of merging the two because, hopefully when that happens, you wouldn't lose the medical aspect of, education first. And, education is important, education before consumption, right? So I think that is cool that those two would still be coalesced. It was weird going to Colorado and having to, for one, not access have access to the medical products, and be charged like a crazy tax rate, having to go, purchase the recreational one, but also just the difference of the feel, learning nothing about the flower. The bud tenders not necessarily being as knowledgeable about the products as they probably would be in the medical market. But yeah, Chelsea, if you had any input on that one, definitely let me know. I left you out of that question.
No, I think that you all are making some really good points, and I think a lot of this is just about control, but the points of getting this to a good place and making sure there's some equity in all parts of cannabis, I think, is the most important thing.
Yes. So the last like longer question. Of course, I got a few rapid questions, but the last longer question I have is like, we're not gonna say we never, but we don't enough talk about the linkage to cannabis as wellness, and the decrease in opioid usage as harm reduction. So do you foresee that? Of course, I've seen definitely other states with decreased opioid usage. With the medical program, do you foresee increase an increase in the decreased amount of usage? I think that's how I would say it, of opioids. And with that being said, how do you think that will affect local police departments? Because one of the questions that I have for them is, if you're not enforcing, if you're not spending this money on drug enforcement, particularly related to cannabis, where are those funds being used, right? And where can we be innovative on, how we redistribute those funds for certain uses?
That's actually something that needs to be discussed that I don't think anybody's talking about. Is like where do those police budgets go for the enforcement of cannabis when they're no longer the ones enforcing it, especially in this current bill where you have this enforcement division. So if you're putting all the state's resources in that means counties and local municipalities don't necessarily need to be putting as much money towards that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why it's really important, as we watch this bill go through, the localities that are going to be getting more money from the revenue based on their past disproportionate enforcement. Is that money going to be going right back to their local police department to continue on with the same culture? Because the law doesn't actually change the culture. And I think that is really when we have to give local power to budget allocation and budget inclusion and budget, like being part of the budgeting process, which I think a lot of grassroots organizers and things that we've talked a lot about state level policy, but I also dance and grassroots movement work. And that is something that a lot of folks are talking about budget reallocation and planning budget advocacy a year in advance, and being able to help create budget proposals with their localities, because it's a hard road once it's proposed and that sort of thing. But I would say that where the money goes is a good question, because it was never properly followed about the enforcement of marijuana. We tried to actually look that up when we were looking and talking about reparations. And this is when we start to have my favorite conversation, which is divesting from policing and investing into local communities.
Yes, and Chelsea, I forgot there was one question specifically for you, being the social justice warrior. Someone asked, how can you tell that an industry has equity in its market?
But how much police they have in their market.
Okay.
I mean, honestly, and that because the enforcement of it is important, right? Even in business, they're creating new business enforcement. And I think that we can literally just tell from living in a police state how the police show up in our quote unquote legal cannabis market. And then of course, like, what is the person and what is the experience look and feel like when you're purchasing? You all had a great conversation about it's more personal with the local folks, the farmers markets. That's part of the legacy culture that we've always experienced. So does that carry on to this new type of industry, right? So those would be the benchmarks or questions for me, is how much do police show up, and how much is my experience still feel that personal legacy culture that we're continuing?
Yes, I agree with you 100%, Chelsea, and Kev. So I wanted to ask you guys a few rapid questions. Of course, I think you guys did a great breakdown of the bill. I'm sure there'll be more updates we have. Kevin, I'll leave space after the questions so you can share updates as far as where people need to be and kind of what's going on. The questions I have, one is pretty funny, right? So in a lot of different localities, in a lot of different states, a lot of different nations, there's many different ways to say cannabis or flower. So outside of cannabis, what are two ways to acknowledge flower or say flower?
But
But
nuts.
no, okay, all right, fair. Chelsea.
Smoke, pot.
Okay, I got that too. Reefer and ganja.
Right, of course. Yeah.
I got cannabis tourism. You guys are well traveled. Where's your favorite place to go and experience cannabis experiences?
Well, I'm going to take this moment to brag a little bit about something I'm really excited about that I have not experienced yet. But next month, I'm actually been invited to Barcelona to do a study tour on cannabis consumption lounges and how to legislate them, how to run them. And so I'm really excited to go and also participate in their Spanibus, their cannabis.
Oh, I heard about that.
Spain.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
So I would love to be invited back, and I can tell you more about what I learned and that sort of thing, and what the experience was like. So
yeah, I'm renewing my passport. I just heard about that, so I'm trying to go next year. I heard it was one of the bigger ones. Of course, that they got that big Jamaica one too. But yes, Kevin, cannabis.
It's funny that Chelsea mentioned that because I was going to say Barcelona. I went there a couple years ago, and I mean, literally, they have these spots you can go in. You pay just like a membership fee that covers you pretty much the whole year or a month, depending on what club you go to. And then you go in, you can purchase your cannabis in there. They have different smoking devices. Some had, volcanoes, others had glass that you could use and borrow and check out. And then there were some that even had like video games and stuff in there, pool tables, live concerts. So it's definitely a vibe, a different vibe too at all these different spots. So that's a good place. But then you can't skip Amsterdam with the coffee lounges. Those are an experience worth experiencing.
Of course. And
I'm
so
excited. Hold on, Kevin. I'm so excited that you said this, and now I need all the references. But yeah, this is the first ever study group that they're doing. So maybe some other folks can go next year too and go out and literally study and bring this information back to the U.S. That's the point. So I'm excited to share that. Yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, I'd love to hear more research and how it's done. The last question I got is, who has the best? What state has the best U.S. flower? I think I expressed to both of you that I'm gonna stand by Maine, and I'm gonna stand by Maine because I've been to Maine. My man has uplifted Maine, Mac Dawson. I'm gonna stand by him. I'm gonna stand by, especially for the East Coast.
Can I talk some trash? I can tell you what state doesn't have the best weed.
I know,
and that's Massachusetts. It's so bad. It's so bad. I mean, I won't lie though, y'all. I think that Maryland has some fire on the East Coast. West Coast, I'm probably gonna go with Washington.
Ooh, okay. I was going to say Oregon. I've had some really incredible things coming out of Oregon by folks that are growing it themselves.
I can imagine organic grown stuff as well from Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
They're very earthy and they care a lot about their plants. Like that. That's how Maine folks are. They're just super like earthy and like hippies and farming. That's them as well. But yeah, so Kev, I just wanted to create the space. Tell them about what the Equity Coalition is doing, upcoming things, the summit, whatever else is important.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Martin mentioned, The bill is House Bill 556, Senate Bill 516. It has its first hearing in the House next Friday, the 17th at 1 p.m. We will be hosting a press conference prior to the hearing at 12 o'clock. The location is to be determined, but we'll make sure that if you follow each of us, I'm sure we'll blast out the info for you. And then the actual hearing, if you want to give testimony during the hearing, you have to submit that testimony by Wednesday, the 15th. And then also on the 22nd, which is a Wednesday, we'll be hosting a Maryland Cannabis Equity Summit, where we'll be bringing in multiple stakeholders from, equity advocates, industry, legislators, and the community as well, to for everybody to get some perspective on some of these items that are currently within the bill and other things that may need to be added, such as the social justice provisions. But I am hearing from a couple different lobbyists that this will likely be an omnibus bill that just puts everything in one. So right now it's an 88-page bill. I would advise you to get through and read as much of that as you can before it gets even longer, because we're fully expecting it to get longer. So definitely come out and join us next week as we advocate and lobby for a fair and equitable cannabis market here in Maryland.
Yes, Kev, thanks for letting them know. I'll be at the summit. I've been, with Kev on all these calls, or not necessarily every call. Kev's been on every call. I've been on as many as I can make. But he's been organizing, and I will say that there's a bunch of good bills in the General Assembly. Of course, not just this general cannabis bills, but a lot of bills that can help people. And I wanted to uplift two bills. One that I testified on, which was the cannabis odor bill. I think that that's important, especially given that it's a legal substance now, and with the enforcement aspect, right? Like this enforcement piece they're pushing. So I think that, of course, that eliminating that sole reasoning for a search, is a great thing. And it's a bill that we've heard previously, but I think it's a bill that actually has wings this year and should pass. Given the sentiment of a lot of Marylanders and Americans. And then there's also so that bill is SB 73 and HB 280. I know that Carter is the Senate sponsor. I don't remember who the House sponsor is right at this second, but I do know that Delegate Deborah Davis. It's Moon for that one. I do know that Delegate Deborah Davis has a good one similar to that one, which I believe is HB 280, and it removes the criminal penalties for cannabis, and that's very important because I think the decrim threshold is now 2.5 ounces as opposed to 10 grams where it was previously, and so anybody with over that then they're looking at this criminal aspect, and so I believe that bill touches on that aspect in excess of 2.5, so that's important, and then there is Jill Carter's bill. I don't remember the name, but I believe it's her and Feldman, and it's like the Automatic Expungement Act, and that is a lot of what we've been discussing. Expungement, making sure they're automatic, making sure that people don't have to go through an extra process to get over this loophole, or not this loophole, but this one thing that stands on the record. Kev, you got something to say on
that? For that bill specifically, those automatic expungements are actually for cannabis possession charges that have been pardoned by the governor. So the governor still has to, issue the pardons to everyone. And then once they're issued the pardons, if this bill passes, then those pardon offenses would then be automatically expunged.
Thank you for clarity. That's great clarity on that one. It's great. Yeah, pardon, we would have liked all the automatic expungements, all around, but getting it by way of pardon, hey, that's great. Maybe that's just a starting place. And the next thing is a Compassionate Access Act. A lot of you have heard me work with Connor Sheffield and the Connor Sheffield Foundation. They helped pass Connor and Rayner's law a few years ago in Maryland that allowed pediatric medical patients access to their medicine, while at school. And so now the Compassionate Access Act basically allows medical patients to use their their medicine while in hospice care or the hospital, I believe is, non-smokables. And of course, you're still in like a medical setting. But this is big time for medical patients, because there's some people who prolong surgery because of being denied their medicine, and then there's also people who have adverse effects to opioids and don't prolong things because of I guess their belief that they're going to need it or use it. And so this is a very big bill, and I know that they've been putting in a lot of work lobbying and pushing for this. And so yeah, that was just a couple updates. And guys, I also wanted to say, please tell them how to stay in contact with you if you have socials, email, however you want people to reach out to you.
So you can follow me as an individual at K4 Junior, and also follow at Uplift National, and reach out. I answer.
For sure.
And I just want to highlight a recent op-ed that myself and Shailene Title put out. It was pushing cannabis. I'm sorry, it's called "Rushing Cannabis Profits Will Harm Black Communities," and it talks about exploitative business practices. And I am here in Virginia, and you can catch us at THC Justice Now on socials, and you can contact me at Chelsea Higgs-Wise on Facebook, Instagram, and Chelsea Wise RVA on Twitter. My email is chelsea@marijuanajustice. Feel free to just email me. And please look out to what we're doing in Virginia. We're trying to release people that are still incarcerated and do some parent protections now that cannabis is legal to consume. So thanks so much, Martin, for having us on.
Yes. Also, there's a bill about that, the cannabis use and child neglect. So I know that Carter has a bill about that, and thanks for flagging that one for me, Chelsea, in my memory. So definitely, guys, pay attention to what happens on this legislative session. As I said, in 3 months, we decide hundreds, sometimes thousands of bills, in which affect us for the remainder of years. And so it's important to tap in. Like I tell everybody, you don't have to pay attention to everything, but focus on things that you care about and that directly affects you. So definitely, stay positive, stay encouraged, and join us in this fight for continued equity in Maryland and the DMV area, right? So yeah, let me make sure I include that. But thanks for joining us again, guys. I'll see you guys soon.
Appreciate you.
Yes. And so that was two great guests. Of course, we appreciate anytime Chelsea and Kevin join us to drop knowledge, to drop gems. If you guys got educated, I know I got educated today. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to them. They're very responsive. And we definitely have a lot of organizing to do, right? The thought is there strength in numbers? So let's have a unified message on, what we want for the community. Thank you very much. See you next time.